What will the future bring from Nintendo? The challenge is Metroid. The power is Nintendo. Defend the planet Zebus against the evil Mother Brain. It's survival or destruction. Do battle or die. Metroid only from Nintendo. Now you're playing with power.
Metroid was very innovative for its time, obviously being the first Metroidvania game. But does it hold up to the incredibly high standards Metroidvanias have today? Let's take a look. Samus Aran was born in a colony on the planet K2L, a major exporter of starship fuel throughout the Galactic Federation. Samus and her parents, both dock workers, live peacefully on K2L until the space pirates attack, raiding the colony for its fuel.
While playing in the nearby woods, Samus hears the commotion. As she makes her way to the colony, Samus is attacked by Ridley, who orchestrated the raid. Meanwhile, Samus's father sneaks aboard the space pirate capital ship and detonates a large quantity of fuel the pirates have loaded into it, causing a massive explosion and destroying the entire colony. Having failed the mission, Ridley leaves Samus and the space pirates abandon the planet.
The mysterious, bird-like Chozo arrive on K2L to find Samus, the only survivor of the space pirate attack. They rescue Samus and take her to the planet Zebus, where they implant her with Chozo DNA to help her survive on the planet's harsh environment. Taking advantage of her newfound superhuman abilities, Samus begins training in military combat techniques under the Chozo, with the promise of one day being able to use her strength to make the galaxy a better place.
Samus grows up under the Chozo's guidance, and with her custom-made Chozo power suit is a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield. One day, Old Bird, who Samus is particularly close to, comes to her and tells her she needs to leave Zebus, to be with her own kind, and to do what she must to make the galaxy a better place. Samus agrees and leaves Zebus to go join the Galactic Federation.
When Samus joins the Federation, she is put into an elite combat unit under the command of General Adam Malkovich, and earns a reputation for following her own moral code at the expense of the military's rules. One day, after being reprimanded for deviating from a mission in order to save a little girl, Samus decides she can make more of a difference by leaving the Federation and striking out on her own as a bounty hunter.
In time, Samus Aran becomes one of the most sought-out and famous bounty hunters in the galaxy. On Zebus, the Chozo are discussing a threat discovered on planet SR-388 and the biological weapon they've created to deal with it, which they call a Metroid. However, Ridley and the space pirates attack, presumably to take the Metroid for their own use. When Samus receives intel about the attack from the Federation, she's more than willing to take the mission.
Samus races off to Zebus, her task to stop the space pirates at all cost and save the Chozo.
And that's where the game begins.
That's all the key details in Samus's backstory taken from the manga, but the original instruction manual has its own take. In the year 2000 of the history of the cosmos, representatives from the many different planets in the galaxy established a congress called the Galactic Federation, and the Age of Prosperity began. A successful exchange of cultures and civilization resulted, and thousands of interstellar spaceships ferried back and forth between planets. But space pirates also appeared to attack the spaceships.
The Federation Bureau created the Galactic Federation Police, but the pirates' attacks were powerful, and it was not easy to catch them in the vastness of space. The Federation Bureau and the Federation Police called together warriors known for their great courage and sent them to do battle with the pirates. These great warriors were called Space Hunters. They received large rewards when they captured pirates and made their living as space bounty hunters.
It is now year 2005 of the history of the cosmos, and something terrible has happened. Space pirates have attacked a deep space research spaceship and seized a capsule containing an unknown life form that have just been discovered on planet SR-388. This life form is in a state of suspended animation, but can be reactivated and will multiply when exposed to beta rays for 24 hours. It is suspected that the entire civilization of planet SR-388 was destroyed by some unknown person or thing, and there is a strong possibility that the life form just discovered was the cause of the planet's destruction. To carelessly let it multiply would be extremely dangerous. The Federation researchers had named it Metroid, and were bringing it back to Earth when it was stolen by the space pirates.
If Metroid is multiplied by the space pirates and then used as a weapon, the entire galactic civilization will be destroyed. After a desperate search, the Federation police have at last found the pirates' headquarters, the fortress planet Zebus. and launched a general attack. But the pirates' resistance is strong, and the police have been unable to take the planet. Meanwhile, in a room hidden deep within the center of the fortress, the preparations for multiplying the Metroid are progressing steadily.
As a last resort, the Federation police have decided on this strategy, to send a space hunter to penetrate the center of the fortress and destroy Mother Brain. The space hunter chosen for this mission is Samus Aran. He is the greatest of all the space hunters and has successfully completed numerous missions that everybody thought were absolutely impossible. He is a cyborg. His entire body has been surgically strengthened with robotics, giving him superpowers. Even the space pirates fear his spacesuit, which can absorb any enemy's power. But his true form is shrouded in mystery.
The planet Zebes is a natural fortress. Its sides are covered with a special kind of stone, and its interior is a complicated maze. On top of that, the pirates have planted devices and booby traps in the maze, and the pirates' eerie followers lie in wait around every corner. Samus has now succeeded in penetrating Zebes, but time is running out. Will he be able to destroy the Metroid and save the galaxy?
Will he be able to?
Also, the manual says penetrating.
Your mission, destroy the giant mechanical organism, the Mother Brain. What are your thoughts on the narrative so far, Rob?
I mean, at least as far as what the game tells you, it's pretty standard for the most part for that era. Your goal is basically just to get to the end and defeat the enemies along the way. But I do like that there are sort of, subtle hints like the Chozo statues, that there's something else going on. You don't see, or at least I don't feel like you see that much in other games of this era.
Yeah, it's definitely just a common problem that games of, well, like you said, this era have, where the story is basically go here, save the princess, beat the final boss, that kind of thing, and it doesn't really get much deeper than that. I think the fact that there is a prologue in the manual shows that they had ideas for a narrative that maybe they just couldn't construct in the games of that time. But as any Metroid fan can tell you, the manual is not really canon. The manga that we briefly touched upon is kind of canon. What is and isn't canon in the Metroid narrative is a little loose, but we've pieced together essentially the main story beats that the manga, as we described it, is pretty much the canon backstory. However, the manual is more accurate to how the game depicts your mission and what you're doing, even though the manual is kind of rough. That being said, games of this era very much leaned into you being the main character and you telling your own story as you played. Our journey throughout Planet Zebes, taking down Ridley and Kraid, and then going into Turian and taking on Mother Brain, was our own story.
Yeah, it's basically just sort of a different approach to what we're used to.
I find it interesting that the instruction booklet would be considered at the time of the game's release the only context for the story, and it gets details wrong. Like you pointed out, words like penetrazing are just spelt wrong, and Samus is repeatedly referred to as a male, and I don't know if that was ever confirmed, if that was because the people writing the manual weren't given the knowledge that plot twist at the end of the game, Samus is a woman, or if it's just kind of a translation error, something of that nature.
That's a good point. I don't know if Japanese has, masculine and feminine pronouns, so it could have just been them assuming, it's a space hunter in a video game in the 80s. Of course it's a man. Women can't shoot guns.
Maybe it's just my natural appreciation for science fiction, and especially the works of H.R. Giger. The Alien movies are amongst my favorite films of all time, but I want more of a story out of my Metroid game, which is weird to say because that's not really what they're designed for, but they do exist and do have them. Later installments of this series do a much better job of blending a narrative with your adventure.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. My grade for the story is a C+. It's a little more basic than, a lot of what we play now, but I think the, little bits that we do get in the game do help elevate it a bit.
I don't really have much else to say because I agree 100% and I gave it the same grade, C+.
All right.
Originally conceived as a non-linear action-adventure game, Metroid has you explore the 5 areas of Zebes as you see fit: Brinstar, Norfair, Kraid and Ridley's lairs, and Torian, where the command center for the space pirates is. You can explore this world by moving Samus left, right, and jumping and falling. She can also only fire her arm cannon in these same directions. This limitation is what can sometimes make the combat very challenging. Some enemies can move almost in any direction and can sometimes respawn behind you and catch you off guard. Although different enemy types do have set movement patterns, you can easily become overwhelmed and take a lot of damage in a short period of time. I think this is a good design choice, as it makes you consciously time your shots to hit enemies and adds value to your limited quantity of missiles. But I can also see how an unprepared or new player would find this very frustrating.
I think it's a good way to think about it, especially, given how many games of that era sort of limited how many objects can be on screen at a time. I think sort of slowing things down and making you think about that was a really good way to work around that limitation. There are a few things that, I think could have been improved. A lot of the platforming feels a little looser than I'd like, especially compared to more recent 2D Metroid games. But overall, the formula works.
I don't think much of the game's difficulty comes from necessarily struggling to make precise jumps or enemies aggressively attacking you until you've inevitably died. But I think the difficulty comes from the penalty for death being way too harsh. When you die, you'll respawn either at the entrance to Brinstar, where you began your adventure, or at the most recent elevator you used. That's not the problem. The problem is how little health you have when you respawn. At the start of the game, you'll have just 30 energy, out of a possible 99. This is a good educational tool for the player. Since enemies will drop health randomly, you'll inevitably pick up some health as you explore, and then quickly learn that you have more than the provided 30 HP, especially when you find more energy tanks, which increase your max 99 HP by 100. There are 8 energy tanks in total, and it's up to you to find them all and max out your total HP. But every time you respawn after death, you'll just have 30 HP again, and none of your energy tanks have been refilled. So you'll have to painstakingly grind random health drops from enemies to get back to max HP. That is what makes the penalty for death too harsh. I think it's enough that the player needs to make the long trek back to where they died in the confusing labyrinth of Planet Zebes. They shouldn't have to worry about grinding their HP back up to full. Especially late game when your total health is above 500 and enemies only drop 5 HP at a time.
Yeah, it really slows things down during the part of the game that, really you should have built the most momentum for.
Some of those issues were subverted for us because we played the game on Nintendo Switch's online subscription service that gives you access to a bunch of classic games, obviously through an emulator, which means it has some features emulators have, like save states, which we abused. But if we were playing the original game as intended on original hardware, we wouldn't have had that luxury.
Other than that, I think, a lot of the challenge of the game is pretty fair. It throws a lot at you, but it's also constantly guiding you towards, new power-ups, new ways to defeat enemies. I never really felt like we were thrown into an unfair situation, at least not, by the game's doing. Performance on Nintendo Switch Online isn't great, but in the Wii version that you played, it seemed like, especially the last boss fight, was a lot more doable.
Yeah, I still would really like to know what the real difference between them is. If it's just server lag, or if it's just the ROMs themselves are somehow different. If they're different versions of the game at different stages, or if they've modified one or the other. I would really like to know why I have 0 issues playing this game on the Wii's Virtual Console, and why on NSO we had tons of problems where I just had to keep throwing myself at Mother Brain over and over and over until we eventually won. And we didn't get the footage of us winning.
I promise we did it. I was there. I saw it.
We mentioned the confusing labyrinth that the game takes place in. While this is true for any Metroidvania game, this is especially true for the original Metroid, because it doesn't have an in-game map function. You have to make your own map as you play. or have an insanely good memory if it's your first time playing, but I wouldn't recommend even attempting that on a first playthrough. The only reason I knew where I was going when Rob and I played is because I've beaten the game, I think, over a dozen times. I'll 100% admit that on my first playthrough ever, I got frustrated and looked up a map online. And honestly, I'm glad I did, because it allowed me to enjoy the original Metroid without the utter confusion the repeating rooms can bring you.
Yeah, you have to respect, this game for basically creating Metroidvanias as a genre. And I think the exploration is really the biggest hook of the game. But it really would have been nice to have, a map or even some direction in the game of where to go, rather than just relying on you to kind of stumble across things, hopefully in sort of the right order.
The game's instruction manual does have, technically, a provided map, but look at this fucking thing. It really doesn't give you much to go off of other than, there's Ridley, there's Kraid, but there's no details to show you how to actually arrive at these locations, just their general area based on where you start. I could see what they were going for here. They wanted you to explore, have some sense of direction, but ultimately wander around and complete the game at your own pace. I think that core design philosophy is good, but there's a reason Metroidvanias moving forward had a map. As you explore, though, you will find upgrades to help you accomplish your goal of bringing down the space pirates. The high jump, screw attack, Varia suit, long beam, wave beam, ice beam, bombs, missiles, morph ball, and of course the previously mentioned energy tanks. How many energy tanks and missiles you have is up to you to decide by finding them, and although the game can technically be completed without having all of the upgrades, I wouldn't recommend it on a first playthrough. Besides, exploring to find all the upgrades is part of how you play a Metroid game. My only real gripe with the upgrade system in this game is that Samus can't hold the ice beam and wave beam at the same time. If you're like me and prefer the wave beam, you'll have to travel back to one of the ice beam Chozo statues to get the ice beam back when it's needed. Then if you decide you want to use the wave beam again, you'll have to travel back to the appropriate Chozo statue again just to switch back. You'll probably end up switching between them at least once, as you need the ice beam to survive the gauntlet leading up to the final boss. Speaking of which, I want to talk about the 3 boss fights in the game. Kraid shoots spikes out of his back that change trajectory and arc towards Samus while simultaneously shooting spikes in a straight path from his belly. Ridley jumps up and down while shooting multiple fireballs at Samus. The problem I have with these boss fights is that they're easily brute forceable or exploitable. As long as you've been diligent with your exploration and gathered as many energy tanks and missiles as you can before fighting them, you can easily just brute force a victory through Kraid by spamming your missiles or your wave beam. You should have enough HP to outlast him. Ridley's fireballs have a set trajectory, which allows players to find safe zones and deal damage to Ridley without taking any damage themselves.
Yeah, they're pretty standard boss fights for the NES era, which is actually a little disappointing given some of the boss fights that have come along in the series since then. The ones that we have now are generally a lot more involved, require a little more technique. Yeah, these ones I just found kind of anticlimactic for the most part.
And then there's the final boss of the game, Mother Brain. Defeating both Ridley and Kraid unlocks the bridge in Torian that leads into Mother Brain's command center. You'll need the ice beam to freeze the escaped Metroids that will try to swarm you and drain your HP, and you'll need a lot of missiles to destroy the glass capsules impeding your progress towards Mother Brain. Once you get to her, you need to evade all projectiles while simultaneously firing missiles at Mother Brain. The first missile will shatter her glass container, giving you a hole to fire your remaining missiles through to damage her directly. Although I've never really had much of an issue with this fight on the Wii Virtual Console version, as we've already mentioned, I found this fight in our current playthrough to be obnoxiously chaotic. With that being said, with enough time and luck, you'll destroy Mother Brain and set the self-destruct sequence in motion to destroy the space pirate base. But that doesn't change the fact that our experience with this fight was greatly hindered by NSO.
So for my grade, as far as gameplay goes, I gave it a B+. There's definitely a lot of things that could have been done better, but just thinking about the fact that no one had really done anything like this before, I have to give it marks for that.
Honestly, I admit I have a lot of nostalgia bias going on with this game. I do really love it, But when I look at it with a modern set of eyes, especially eyes that know where the series is going to go and how much more improved it's going to become, I just can't look past the problems it has. The lack of a map, grinding for HP instead of just respawning with it replenished, repeating identical areas, easily exploitable or obnoxiously chaotic bosses, and having to travel long distances to change between two different pieces of equipment really hurt the game today. I still have a lot of fun playing Metroid, but I'm going to give the gameplay category a B.
Moving on to the audio, I think this is one of the game's really strong points. Most of the sound effects sound satisfying and punchy. I mean, a lot of the music has just become iconic for the series, especially the main Brinstar theme. The game doesn't necessarily have a lot of strong melodies like that, but it does create a nice atmosphere once you get further into the planet of Zebes.
Metroid knocks it out of the park with its sound design. Although I can honestly take or leave some of the combat sound effects, the only sounds that really stand out to me are the noises the Wave Beam and Screw Attack make. But the soundtrack, as Rob just said, is pretty goddamn amazing. Right away, the song that plays when you boot up the game lets you know you're in for a dark and creepy experience, which contrasts to the more adventurous and encouraging tune of the song you'll hear right when you start the game in Brinstar. Each area of the game has its own unique song that plays, which could be a good indicator to help you determine where you are without a map, and each song has a unique sound that brings out different emotions from the player. I remember the first time I played the game and slowed to a crawl whenever I went off the beaten path and heard the secret area theme, because I felt like something was following me. I love all the music in Metroid, from the weirdly cheery melody of Kraid's lair to the maddening repetition of Ridley's lair. It's a fantastic soundtrack that deserves to be recognized for what it accomplishes. I give the audio category an A+.
I was pretty close to that. I gave it an A. Everything just works so well to create a mood for the game that's really distinct from a lot of what was being done on the NES at the time.
This is another category that Metroid knocks it out of the park with. It manages to take the limited graphical power of the NES and make a unique art style all its own. Although it takes obvious inspirations from the works of H.R. Giger, it still retains its own identity. I love the detailed shading on the enemy sprites and environment. It makes the game feel dark and isolating while still using a bright color palette, and it really shows the care that was put into the art of the game.
Yeah, I think they did a really great job of translating what are honestly pretty elaborate designs into, 80s pixel art. And I like that you mentioned the fairly bright color palette too, especially, working around the black background, which I'm assuming they kind of had to do for technical limitations. It really makes things pop and does make things feel a lot more atmospheric.
Some of the attacks that both enemies like bosses and Samus use feel like they really are glowing balls of energy, even though they are a flat color. I'm not sure how exactly they pulled that off, but I'll take it as a deliberate use of the player's imagination by the developers. Maybe it's the black background making the attack stand out more? I'm not sure.
If I had one complaint about the visuals, it might be that sometimes they leave a little too much to the player's imagination, especially in Norfair. Hard to tell exactly what environmental features you're supposed to be looking at, which does kind of hurt the atmosphere in that section. But overall, the visuals are a really nice part of this game.
Just like I said back in our Shinobi review, I'm a sucker for the 8-bit and 16-bit era's visuals. I can't explain it other than simply saying I love pixels. I think my exact line was, I like squares that make pictures of things that aren't squares. When done right, you can create a visual style that holds up decades later. Although I don't think the original Metroid is necessarily the best looking NES game out there, it has a memorable look to it that at least has all the building blocks of where the series is going to go. So I give the visuals an A.
Yeah, I really like the distinct look of the game. Again, this is another category where it does kind of suffer compared to the following games in the series. So I gave it a B+.
I don't have much to say here. I love exploration. I love finding my own path in a game. I love good old 2D action. I love when a game makes me feel vulnerable. I love when a game makes me feel powerful. I love sci-fi. So obviously, I love Metroid. My personal appeal grade is an A+.
I agree with a lot of that. I think Metroid has always been a series that, even though I haven't really finished a game before this, I've always enjoyed all the games I've played. You know, I like the Metroidvania formula in other games. Really, my only complaint is that this just kind of feels like the beginning of a genre rather than necessarily the best example of it. I think other games in the series did better with the conventions of the genre, and so have other games that have come out since then, even indie stuff. So for my personal appeal, I gave it a B. A lot of what Metroid does has been built on and improved in other games, both in the Metroid series and outside of it. But you have to respect, just how much it did with how little they had at the time. So my final grade for the game is a B+.
Metroid's visuals and sound design are fantastic, but the gameplay hasn't aged as well as other games from this era, and definitely other Metroid titles. The absence of an in-game map system, having to journey from different points on the map to switch your wave beam and ice beam, grinding for HP and missiles, the exploitable and chaotic boss fights, all need to be taken into account. I still think this game is good, it just doesn't hold up to the test of time as well as its children. Metroid crawled so its descendants could walk and run, and it deserves credit for that, but that doesn't make it immune to criticism. As much as I love this game, my final grade is B.
Alright, so that was our review of the original Metroid. If you like that, you can check out our reviews of Shinobi or Hollow Knight. We're both really proud of those. Or, if you want to see more Metroid stuff from us, you can check out our playthrough. Bye for now!